I'm gonna add to that this next one, which is it the position of Verizon and MCPS, so directed to each individually, that the cell tower at Neelsville will have no adverse effect and no adverse health impact on Neelsville middle school students?
So I'm gonna just jump in and, what we can tell you is that the proposed tower will meet and be far below the standards that the FCC sets up for acceptable human exposure, okay? You've heard a lot of information on the other side of that issue. This is not really the forum for that issue to be decided. Teresa knows that that's the FCC's purview. We are following what we have to do under the law to comply with the FCC guidelines. You've heard from Paul that we will be hundreds of times below what we are allowed to be at. When you say, will the students be free from risk and they'll have good health, you also heard tonight that, you know, a body is a body and has lots of competing forces coming at it. I can't tell you that the students here will or will not have good health because I don't know what these students are doing. But I can tell you that this site meets and goes beyond what's required in order to meet those safety standards of the FCC. So, you know, if you don't like the standards, then you go to the FCC and try to get that changed. That's not our job. We are doing our job in that regard.
Let me restate and slightly reframe the question specifically for Boyd. Is it your opinion, or your office's opinion, or MCPS's opinion, that putting the cell phone tower up here will not have an adverse effect on the kids? Now, if their health, or their diet has an adverse effect and all that, put that aside, but it's just, in your opinion, your office's opinion, is it your position that it doesn't?
Well, if you want to explain the RF better, but for us, from a locational perspective, we believe it's a good site because it's on the side of the building services part of the building. It's not near common activity area. It's the closest thing are dumpsters and building services parking lot, gravel parking lot. That's kind of why the site was, I'd be happy to walk out there with you.
Are you aware that in the proposed renovation of the building, which actually is not going to happen right now, but may happen in the future, they're putting infants and toddlers back there?
I've had our architect look at the project. He hasn't mentioned that.
That was never, that was a proposal, but that was
Well,
never.
that was one of the proposed places to put infants and toddlers was on the back side of the school so that they would have their own parking lot.
Well, part of the lease, I just want to address two parts of that. When we enter a lease, the landlord, who would be MCPS, is making a statement that they have the authority to enter the agreement. And that document is binding, and I don't think the county would be entering into a lease if there was a question at all that property was not gonna be available, because then they have a problem under their lease as the landlord. And I also wanted to just sort of from a technical standpoint explain that part of the conditional use process is we have to go through a series of proof of whether or not there are adverse effects at this location and how those are met, or not met, but how those are addressed, because a conditional use is a legislative determination that what are acceptable levels of effects at a certain property for a certain use. So that is another element that we have to go through as part of our due diligence on the application. And I think, Paul, did you have something you said you wanted to add?
I don't want to go back into an RF discussion, but I just wanted to say, as a registered professional engineer, my first priority is to hold paramount the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And I wouldn't support or be behind any project that I thought would be detrimental to human beings, including children.
Thank you.
So, I'm lost again. What is this about infant and toddlers? So, are they gonna be coming put on this property, or?
They are here.
They're here already.
Already here.
They're in that
part of the program.
Oh my
That
goodness.
is in that, small building that's, you
To
know
the
where
left
the
of
bus
Jackson.
lane is, and it's on the right side of the bus lane as you come towards the school.
You know how there's like a separate building from us before you get to our main entrance?
Like when you pull in the driveway, you passive as the
Between
toddlers
here
and then
and
you
the,
come to the school?
tennis courts. It's a building between the gym and the
Okay.
tennis courts.
Ms. Park,
Been there.
It's a facility
Uh,
that houses a
is there
program
any,
where they
is there any
help
restriction that
Second.
Hang on,
the
hang on.
students
Miss Dow,
cannot venture
so
around?
what is-
We have somebody already.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The infants and toddlers program, she knows more about it than I do, but my understanding is that it's a program where they take, children that have special needs, and they house them in this, building for, instruction, and, it's a very large program that actually
daycare.
is in this small building.
Not a day.
No, it's not a daycare.
No.
No.
It's not daycare,
Uh-uh.
it's a instructional,
Yeah.
and they help overcome, disabilities and things, correct?
Yeah, we work with, actually, we work with families, children and families, with delays or disabilities, developmental delays or disabilities. We have about 70 to 75 staff members in that little teeny tiny building over there. And we do have classes and meetings and therapies that happen in that building. Most of our, I'm gonna be honest, most of our, direct work with children and families happens in their home. There are lots of families that live near here, but we do have lots of families that do come to our site. Most of our work is done not in that building, though.
What are the classrooms for?
We do have a few classes for children with very intensive needs, or if for some reason services cannot be delivered in their home for any number of reasons. We would have that there. We also have families children and families that come on a weekly basis for IEP meetings, for IFSP meetings, and for like infant massage classes. Anytime we have a group, we have lots of sometimes we have night classes for parents to learn about strategies and things to help their children. But we are MCPS employees. I am 100% an MCPS employee.
This question I have here kind of relates to your center, and if it gets relocated, which I know is just a proposal, and other future developments. So, if the school or MCPS later determines that the tower is presenting a health risk, will you have it removed at your cost upon request? And I'll add on to that, if the center is moved, for example, to the other side for whatever reason, then the same thing would apply. Would you have it removed at MCPS request if it's in the future determined that it's presenting a health risk?
Well, the lease document has that language that it has to fit within certain frequencies that are safe and acceptable. So yeah, if there was an issue, they would have to correct that, the carrier.
So, yes.
Good, I was just gonna say that Verizon in their annual report that they put out, their 10Ks actually lets the shareholders know that there may be lawsuits and changes in regulation that may cause the shareholders, that it could change the revenue for the company. You can look that up. All the cell tower companies have 10Ks where they inform the stakeholders who own their stock that there might be a risk financially. That's all I wanted to say. And no insurance policy will actually, as far as I know, they don't insure for electromagnetic radiation for the cellular companies, because there are some insurance groups that would rate it as high risk, because we don't know potentially what could happen in the future.
Somebody actually asked a question along those lines, which was, what kind of insurance do you have? This is directed toward Verizon, and I assume, or it says Verizon and MCPS. What kind of insurance do you have for potential harm, like cancer? Does MCPS or Verizon cover if my child gets sick or later? Or sick later, I'm sorry.
The lease terms govern the insurance that Verizon Wireless is required to cover. It is required to cover, to provide insurance. The lease specifies what it has to provide, and it also has an indemnification provision. So, those issues are addressed between MCPS and the tenant, in this case Verizon Wireless. And then if any other co-locators came on, there would be a sublease between Verizon Wireless and those tenants. But everything in the prime lease with MCPS would still be applicable, so.
Do they cover for electromagnetic radiation?
We get insurance certificates from the carriers every year.
I mean, the lease documents that all this stuff happens to be in there.
There is no
Oh, yeah.
lease, the lease is not, we haven't entered the lease yet because Montgomery County has to go through its process.
Are they normally
No.
available?
I mean, they're not available from Verizon Wireless, there's information in there that's proprietary. I don't know, when we're dealing with the county, I'm not sure what the information rules are.
It's public information.
Has to provide.
The-
Yeah.
The county
Yeah.
told me they didn't cover electromagnetic radiation or cancer from the radio frequency exposures from the
So I
schools.
think the question would really be a question for Boyd, because it would be, MCPS ultimately has the discretion to say we will or will not enter this lease because it does or does not have the insurance required, or we can or can't get the insurance that we want, for example. So I guess the question would be, has MCPS decided to pursue insurance for damage from radiation from cell towers? And if yes, explain, and if not, then why not?
We only have the insurance coverage that's required for the monopole. I mean, you're asking a question about something that knows no bounds, you know. It doesn't know the school boundary, the RF, and what may or may not cause these diseases, so it's kind of an arbitrary to link a cause, you know. That's the way I look at it now. Paul, you have more information on that?
I contacted MCPS about this, and I heard that they don't have coverage, they don't have insurance coverage, or they're self-insured, might have been the word, I could find the document, but related to the electromagnetic radiation exposures. I don't believe that the cell tower companies are covered for long-term cumulative damage. I know there's a lot of lawsuits moving forward now in the DC Supreme Court.
If I can add on that with the
Superior.
RF, we can ask a carrier at any time, and they've done a study. They did it once for us at Wheaton because I guess somebody had some kind of reading device that was, whatever they were doing, it was not inaccurate, or was not accurately done, and they promoted that. So we asked T-Mobile, you go to Wheaton High School and do a study, and they did the analysis, and everything was within the limits. It's an inactive site. With that, Fairfax County Public Schools has on their website information where they've done pre and post tests of their school sites measuring the RF, and I recommend you go to that. You can see, and they have elementary school sites too. My three sons go to Thoreau Middle School, which has a monopole site. Nobody even ever mentioned anything to it. I think they have slightly more students than here. Nobody notices, they don't say anything. Fairfax County Schools has three times the amount of poles that we have here. And they have an outside company that manages it, and they do RF readings. And they've done pre and post tests, and they advertise it. That information
Yes,
is readily available.
I've seen it, and what I would say about it is, just like I showed how high our government allows, which is thousands of times more than other countries, that I've looked at it and was actually very concerned about the numbers I saw at the school, because it was so much more than you might encounter when you're not so close to a tower. There was a study just done on kindergartners, because kindergartners don't use phones, right? So they put an exposure, they put a little exposure. Well, actually, right, okay. Well, these kindergartners in Australia didn't, and they did several kindergartens, and they put on a wristband on the children and measured if their kindergartens were near the cell tower and with schools that were not near the cell tower. And they found, I think it was about 3 times as much radio frequency exposure to the children who were with the base station right close. I can send that to anyone who's interested. And that is documented with a dosimeter, very, very specific machinery for that. So, if measurements show FCC compliance, the concern is that our FCC limits are not protective of health, and that's the American Academy of Pediatrics actually wrote our government calling for a review of the research and to have FCC limits that protect children and pregnant women. And our government is under review of that now, and you can go online and read the submissions actually to the FCC on this issue. So.